and we are going to the topic of what are the responsibilities of power. Okay, so that's our topic for today, responsibilities of power. And let's get going here. So we're going to look at we're going to introduce the topic. Then we are going to after we introduce the topic, we're going to talk about Jewish independence and the significance of Jewish independence as regards this topic. And then we're going to look at power and responsibility, tyranny of the majority, a topic that's been spoken about a lot lately, self-determination, and then we'll summarize everything that we've come to up to this point. Okay, so we'll come to a conclusion about this this very important topic. Okay, so let's look first and let's introduce the topic, and we'll talk about that there are a few sentences that changed the course of Jewish history. That's a bold statement. Maybe Moshe telling Paro to let his people go, or God telling Avram to go to Eretz Yisrael. Those might be some of the few sentences that have really changed the course of Jewish history. But one of them, arguably, is David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding prime minister and second longest serving prime minister, when he said that we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Israel. His declaration of independence, right? This is a bold statement, courageous statement, did not have to be said, was said in order to create the Jewish state. And Jewish history forever changed with the founding of the state of Israel. With that declaration, David Ben-Gurion now created the state of Israel, him and his founding partners. And for the first time in over 2,000 years, the Jewish people finally had the power to determine their own futures. Before this, they were at the mercy of the Gentiles that were in control of them, or the Muslims that were in control of them, the Arabs that were in control of them. And now, for the very first time, the Jewish people have the power to control their own destiny, and they have the power. And not only that, right? They're going to have power over others as well. So now there are many powerful messages that Ben-Gurion left for the Jewish people. And one that has resonated with Israelis for decades is Ben-Gurion's emphasis on Jewish independence. Right? And he said that our future does not depend on what the Gentiles will say, but what the Jews will do. Right? Even today, when we talk about the influence that America and Europe and other countries have on Israeli politicians and the pressures that they put on them, it's still our decision what to do, and our future will be determined by the decisions that we make, not by what Gentiles will say. We can still determine and decide not to listen. It's based on us. From this point on, from the start of the Jewish state, this was the first time that the Jews, now their destiny was in their hands, not somebody else's, and that was a bold time. Now, in that one statement where Ben-Gurion says that the future doesn't depend on what Gentiles will say, but what Jews will do, Ben-Gurion taught the Jewish people that the meaning of what Zionism was all about and the state of Israel. It was for us to determine our own future. Right? That was the entire goal of Zionism, was that Jews should be the ones to determine their future, the Jewish people. And from this point on, the Jews would not be dependent on anyone else as they had been for 2,000 years. So now we are going through, in 1948, a national transformation. The Jewish people are now empowered to rule over themselves and rule over other people that fell in their jurisdiction. And that's an even bigger novelty, a bigger chiddush to say that all of a sudden it's not just that the Jewish people are in charge of their own destiny, but now they also will rule over others. They were independent, and now they only had themselves and God to rely on for the future. Okay, so now comes responsibility, because whenever you have power, responsibility comes along with it, right? So the leaders of the Yishuv now had, all of a sudden, they had to fund a defense force, an intelligence corps. They had to build infrastructure. They had to allow industry to develop, and most importantly, they had to feed an entire nation. They had to make sure there was bread. There wasn't enough food in the beginning of the state of Israel. So all of a sudden, they had tremendous responsibilities. And many of Israel's citizens at its very founding were immigrants that had just arrived in Israel a few years before. 1 million A million more immigrants would come to Israel and make their home within just a few years of 1948. So you had in 1948, you had a large percentage of the population were already just fresh immigrants off the boat, and then they become what we call they have vetek, they have seniority right off the bat, because within a year or two, a million more immigrants arrive from the Arab lands and from Europe and from the United States. And it's amazing. All of a sudden, the country is it's one large immigrant country. So the responsibility to take care of these immigrants, and we did not do the best of jobs, although it's understandable considering the fact that we were a brand new state and we had to deal with all of these people. So the responsibility on the new Jewish state's shoulders and its leaders was massive, overbearing, absolutely incredible. Now, there's an irony that comes with power, right? Because on the one hand, power allows the dreams that were just fantasies a couple of years ago to be able to put to fruition. For years, Jews had dreamt of coming back to Israel. It was a fantasy. It was something that would happen in a Messianic era. That's it. And then all of a sudden, it's reality. We now have our own country. We have our own state. So when leaders are powerless, they don't have the tools to actualize their plans. They're just plans. They're just dreams. But with power, as the Jews gained in 1948, now they could take those dreams and they could put them into fruition. So in a democracy, power usually comes with a mandate to govern, and that's for long-wished plans. You campaign for a while, months, sometimes years. You campaign, and with a certain frame of reference, a certain mindset that you want to accomplish a certain amount. And you want to accomplish a certain amount, and that's your plan, right? So, but that power also comes with responsibility to limit your ambition in order to ensure that minorities and their opinions aren't marginalized. Right? There's this sense of, now that we're elected, we can do what we want, is not a democratic viewpoint. Although people think it is because, that's how democracy works. You win an election, you get to do what you want, but it's not true. That's not how democracies work. It's not how democracies work, and it's not how democracies are supposed to work. Okay, that is not how democracies are supposed to work. You have power comes with responsibility that you have to make sure that the minority is listened to. Power is not a license to wield authority without limitations. Okay, so first and foremost, in a functional democracy, one in which the leader has won the election, and the majority supports him, the first place he's got to look, or she's got to look, the leader has to look at the minority and say, okay, what am I going to do to ensure that they don't feel sidelined, that they don't feel outside the box of normal citizenship? That's something that they've got to ask themselves, and they have to say, okay, what are the next steps? What are we going to be doing? Okay. How are we going to ensure that the minority is paid attention to, minority is listened to? That is key. So when Israel declares its independence, its first responsibility is securing the safety of its citizens. There were 5 Arab armies who immediately attacked the new IDF, right? There used to be a paramilitary force called Haganah and Irgun, but now they all have to come together, and they have to fend off attackers and ensure the territorial integrity of the new Jewish state, right? The Arabs are trying to take over this land, as much land as possible. The Jews have to push them back, right? That's what the Zionist state has to do, is push their enemies back, ensuring the safety and security of the Jewish people. So after Israel emerged victorious from its independence war, and it secured an extra 20% of land, now it had to face Palestinian Arab terrorism that came from many different borders. You had the Fedayeen coming in from Egypt, you had cross-border attacks coming from Lebanon and Syria and Jordan, and Israel had to defend against these. Okay, now, Israel's founders were mostly Ashkenazim. It's a strange phenomenon for a very simple reason, because the majority of the Jews were Sephardim. The majority of the Jews in Israel were Sephardim. So all of a sudden we find, and this is very strange, but we find that the Sephardim, or the majority of the state of Israel, the majority of the population, are not the ones ruling. It's the Ashkenazi Jews. And Israel's Sephardic and Mizrahi populations were not made to feel as part of the state. They were not made to feel as equal citizens. They were made to feel as second-class citizens. This is a huge mistake that early Ashkenazi leaders made. So they were, and they felt it. The Sephardic and Mizrahi populations felt excluded from decision and policy-making forums. Israel's prime ministers would all, and to this day this is true, be Ashkenazim, and it would be decades before powerful ministries, top military positions, bureaucratic spots would go to Mizrahi Jews. With you had a new police department, you had new hospitals, you had fire brigades, schools, right? All these things. It was the new Israeli leaders' responsibility to make sure that it was a fair and just nation, and that had to be by paying attention to the minorities in the country, and that was not being done. Okay, so now, most importantly, the Israeli leaders are entrusted with power by the nation's citizens. It has to make sure that it doesn't practice what we call the tyranny of the majority. Okay, that's what is tyranny? It's a harsh characterization. What it means is it's a democratically elected leadership who governs as if the majority that elected them is the only opinion that counts, and when it comes to making decisions about policy, and that's a huge mistake. In a true liberal, and I don't mean left wing, but a true liberal democracy, one that Israel strives to build, and one that most of the world's democracies that are worthy of being modeled after. Okay, so they have to take all of their citizens' needs and opinions into consideration. It can't solely rule based on its plans. It has to compromise. It has to ensure that government resources are spent on the minority of citizens, especially the ones that didn't vote for them and for their priorities. One can't simply say, we're going to, now you've lost, so all of your ideas are going to be finished and ended, and there will not be a budget set for those priorities. That's not how governing works. Governing does not work that you win an election and you have all the power and you can do whatever you want. We still have to pay attention to the minority. And the Zionist movement was organized to give the Jewish people the ability to exercise its right to self-determination. The ability to determine one's own future requires power. The Jewish people ensured it acquired and exercised power immediately after founding the state. And that's when this is one of the most important lines that I think that David Ben-Gurion ever said. In terms of, when I say important, I don't mean that it had tremendous consequences. When I say that it's an important line, I mean that for the future of the state of Israel. This is what he said. He cautioned the people, and he said the fate of Israel depends on two things: its strength and its righteousness. Strength and righteousness. It's not enough for the Jewish people to have and exercise power. It has to do it with righteousness, and that's the minority Israeli citizens, that's Israeli Arabs, and also Palestinians. We need to make sure that we are acting righteously to everyone that we are in control of. This is where we come to the conclusion. There was perhaps no more powerful position in Jewish history than the Jewish king. Maimonides wrote that the king's need to limit his own power. Just as the Torah has granted the king great honor and obligated everyone to revere him, so too has it commanded him to be humble and modest. Watch how many times the Rambam is going to use the word humble in this sentence. He should be gracious and merciful to the small and great, involving himself in good and welfare. He should protect the honor of even the humblest of men. When he speaks to people as a community, he should speak gently. He should always conduct himself with great humility. He should bear the nation's difficulties, burdens, and complaints, and anger as a nurse carries an infant. That's the attitude the king should have. Not because he's powerful, he can do what he wants. In Judaism and Zionism, the powerful never abuse their power. They are to exercise it judiciously. That's the idea of the responsibility of power when it comes to Zionism, when it comes to Judaism, and when it comes to the state of Israel. It's got to be done in a way where it's not winner takes all, but that all opinions are considered and all opinions are catered to, especially the lowest and shortest of voices that have trouble making themselves heard. Okay, that's our lecture for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to next week's.